Welcome to the Leadership Series, my monthly sit down with the CEO and have a chat about leadership in the not-for-profit sector. I'm really lucky. Today, my guest is Nieves Murray. Nieves is an experienced CEO who started life, believe it or not, as a graduate trainee electrical engineer. Has moved and headed up IRT, a large aged care provider, and today finds herself as CEO of Peak Body Suicide Prevention Australia. Welcome and thank you so much for your time on this Friday afternoon, Nieves. Much appreciated.
My pleasure, Liska.
So we're going to kick off with the question I always ask. You know, CEOs lead from the front. So what's the most important decision that you make as CEO and leader of your business?
Well, I think it's the people that you bring into the organisation, because ultimately you want to recruit people that have the right skills for the role, but moreover, the right attitude. And so I think every recruitment decision that you make as a leader sets the next step in the tone of the organisation. So, you know, on a daily basis, the people that you bring into the business are probably the key decision that you will make.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that CEOs, you know, we talk about leading from the front or, you know, being at the front of an organisation, but essentially you're just one cog in the wheel. And I think as a CEO, you need to think about that. You need to think about the fact that it's the team you take with you that creates an organisation. You're just one step in the history of that organisation, and making sure that every decision you make takes the organisation, leaves the organisation just that little bit better, is also something that I always keep front of mind, making sure that every decision I make is a decision in the right direction for the organisation.
Thank you for that. So, you know, we had Freedom Day, a week or two ago, and I actually went into the office for the first time yesterday. And COVID certainly has changed the way we work. You know, I walked into my office with a mask and hand sanitizer and scanned in, and there was, you know, not that many people there. So what has that meant for you as a leader? What have you done differently? Have your staff needed something different from you?
Without question, COVID and lockdowns have created a new layer of complexity in the workplace. I think one of the things that became patently obvious to me at the start was that we needed to connect even more. So those incidental occasions where you bump into colleagues just don't occur when you're all working remotely. So deliberately bringing the team together, making deliberate decisions to have informal interactions, you know, setting up sessions where you could have a stretch and flex, for example, something outside of the work environment, but really increasing the number of one-on-one contacts, the number of team meetings via Zoom, etc., to stay connected with people. The other thing that we certainly amplified was that cognizance of the person's life outside of work. You know, we go into each other's, you know, lounge rooms, studies, kitchens, dining rooms on Zoom. We get to know each other's pets. Children make cameo appearances into Zoom meetings. I think that for me certainly sharpened my thinking about the fact that, you know, we don't just employ somebody with a skill set, we employ a whole human being, and making sure that during lockdown that we were cognizant of a person's life outside of work, I think was really important, and making sure that we were supporting them, whether they were homeschooling, whether they were alone at home, or whatever their circumstances were, that we were actually cognizant of that, and that we made sure that our people were well, not just from a workplace perspective, but also in their home situation.
You know, I think, Nieves, my observations, we used to be the employee template, whereas now what people need is far more individualised. And I know the HR leaders that I talk to, that, you know, you talk about that complexity, because everybody needs something just a little bit different. So have there been any silver linings for you?
Well, there's obviously the environmental silver lining, you know, the few occasions where I had to go into the city in particular over the lockdown period, you know, the fact that there was less traffic on the roads, the fact that there was fewer people around, I think that that certainly was a silver lining. I think the other silver lining is that there was a stronger awareness of people's mental well-being. and people were more had more front of mind the fact that they needed to connect with others, and making sure that they touch base with people, not just from a work perspective, but to make sure that their colleagues were okay, truly okay. You know, those informal interactions, I think, increased. And so I think that's a silver lining, that we actually got to know each other better as people.
You know, and that leads on to, I suppose, the next question. I shared with you before this meeting the McKinsey's report, the Great Attrition or the Great Attraction, or also known as the Great Resignation. And you know, the thing that I really took away from reading that paper was people want to be employees wanting to be relationally valued, and employers not necessarily having the frameworks, and they respond transactionally, like, we'll give you more pay, or we'll offer you more flexibility. But there's an emotional, there's something emotional that sits under that need to be relationally valued. So how does that, have you given any thought to that? And as CEO, how do you shape and influence culture when you're not seeing people?
Well, Liska, I think it's something I learned as a young CEO or a new CEO, and that's that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So I've been fortunate that throughout my career, I've kind of had that as a mantra. And so for me, it was really kind of leveraging that approach that I had, and amplifying that and doing more of that. I've always worked certainly in the last few decades, I've worked in the human services area, and that also lends itself to a more compassionate approach to leadership, and an approach that values individuals. So I think, you know, I often say people will copy your products, people will copy your policies and practices, people may even copy your strategy, but they can never copy your culture. The culture is what you create together with your people. And I think that in times of hardship, just like we've gone through, that's where organisations that are focused on culture, focused on the connection between people and empowering people to be the best that they can be, are the ones that will not just survive but thrive in times of complexity like we've just gone through.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So no business operates in isolation. I think, you know, we've talked about that in different ways in our conversation today. But when you are considering partnering, you know, with another business, what factors are deal breakers for you?
Values misalignment. I think you need to ensure that the organisations that you partner with align with your values at an organisational level, and that the partner that you enter into an agreement with, or even informally, is someone who delivers on what they say they're going to do. Otherwise, it becomes incredibly frustrating. So that open and transparent dialogue that you can have coming from a place of trust, I think, is critical in any successful partnership, and not stepping away from the tough conversations, actually stepping into those conversations from a place of trust.
Because I was going to ask you, you know, when you meet people, particularly if it's someone that you haven't met or done business with before, how do you actually find out if you are values aligned?
Well, usually it's by having lots of conversations, and often you will know from what others have said, what other partnerships they've had, whether they've had any other partnerships, just by discussing and having a common goal as well, articulating what that goal is, and staying within that remit rather than trying to do everything together, but stay within that remit. Be very clear about what you're trying to achieve together.
I suppose we've talked about that as leaders as well, you know, as businesses, staying in your swim lane, knowing what you're good at. So just taking a slightly different track here, because you are an active board member, so you've seen it from the other side, but as a CEO, how do you find your place on a board?
It's It's interesting because I think it varies from board to board, and even as your boards evolve. Certainly, in my time as CEO, I've worked with a number of boards and with boards that have evolved, that have either changed because of election processes, as an example, or whether they've changed because there's been a deliberate desire to modernise a board, for example. So really it is about understanding where your board is in respect of its evolution. The other advice I would give CEOs, particularly new CEOs, is to ensure that your relationship with the board is one of teaching and learning. A board's not in the business 24/7 like you are as a CEO. And so they'll dive into the business maybe once a month, once a quarter, thereabouts. And so there'll be details that they don't know. So don't assume that because they don't know, they're less committed to the organisation. That's not the case. The difference is that you're living and breathing the organisation 24/7. So when those occasions arise, rather than feel frustrated, which is sometimes a natural reaction as a CEO, take it as an opportunity to teach and bring directors with you. And also be curious. Directors will have a lot to offer. So it's about ensuring that you're using your board as a sounding board and building trust with them, providing clarity for them, and also for staff. I think that the role of a CEO is pivotal in that, being that conduit between the organisation and the strategy of where the organisation heads. As the conduit, your level of clarity, your capacity to synthesise lots of information and create clear, simple, understandable messages is really important. So I think the role of the CEO is both to teach and to learn.
I really like your word curiosity. I think it's underused in business, you know. Anyway, that's a conversation for another day. So, you know, over the last few months, I've hosted 4 roundtables on sustainability, you know, the planet, people, performance pillars, and I've just been blown away by the level of interest. And I think sustainability is something that the NFP sector has actually lagged behind in. Why do you think it's now becoming business critical rather than a nice to have?
Look, I think in the not-for-profit space, generally speaking, we've seen that we're not great polluters. So it's not about us, it's about the other side, those that are creating problems for the planet. I think it's become more and more evident that issues to do with the planet's well-being are not just about the great polluters, it's about all of us doing our piece. And I think it speaks well into the mindset of not-for-profit organisations, because we are about leaving a legacy of a better world, and we can't ignore the fact that the planet that we live on needs to be sustainable for our children, for our grandchildren, for animals, for you know, vegetation and plants and so forth. So I think it speaks into the mindset of a not-for-profit. I think it's I also think the younger generation is pushing us in that direction. We have wise young people demanding that we actually take these things into consideration, because it's their future and the future of their children.
Yeah, and it's something that it's been raised by employees, younger employees, as something that's important to them in a business cultural context. So talking about younger employees, succession planning is key, and you started our conversation by saying, you know, it's all about the people. The people I bring in, the recruitment of right people for our organisation. So, and in today's environment, the demand for talent is outstripping supply, and the stats have that that's not going to change much in the next couple of years. So I used to ask, who do you promote? But I think the question I'm interested in now is, how do you engage your key talent to be part of your succession planning?
Without question, it's about always recruiting people who are better than you. So seek to find people who have more talent than you, who have more potential. And certainly that's something, even as a new CEO, as a young CEO, finding that 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 person who is better and can do their role as well as you can do your job. I also think it's about not having fear in recruiting people who are smart and have a good runway ahead of them, and also not fearing that they're going to move on. I've spoken to colleagues who feel reticent to invest in people because they're going to move on. Quite the contrary. I think the better an experience every employee has, the more likely they are to return to the organisation, either in a step-up position or as the CEO. I also take great pains to teach people when they join, not keeping secrets, not being protective of my information, and making sure that I take people with me on strategy discussions, give them exposure to the board, help them see into things like election processes for board, get them to see the governance aspects without the responsibility of it. But to give them exposure to it, so it's not foreign, it's not secret squirrel business, it's part of running an organisation.
And I think what you're talking about there is certainly something people want to learn. There's this idea that young people are going to have, 15 different jobs. What people want is new learning experiences more than actually having a new job every 2 years. They're moving a job to get a new learning experience. So I think what you're talking about speaks very much to what this current generation are looking for. And many, many years ago, I did have a boss and she said to me, I'd rather have you for 12 months than someone not so good for 3 years. Because your business, I suppose, benefits from bright young minds, and you end up keeping half of them in any case. So
they come back. That's the other experience I've had. If you teach well and you treat people as whole people and with respect, people come back to an organisation after they've gone and learnt something new elsewhere, and not shutting people out once they've made the decision to move on, but keeping the connection, creating almost an alumni structure where you're staying in touch with people, because people, as you rightly say, they're seeking new learning opportunities. They're just filling their toolbox with tools so that they can be the best they can in their career. And giving them as many opportunities as you can to get a look into the role of a CEO, so that it's not scary, it's not frightening.
When you start,
yeah, that's right.
Talking about family, you can probably hear the kitchen behind me, so sorry about that. So Nieves, what's your best habit?
My best talent?
No, habit.
Habit.
You can talk about your best talent as well.
Oh, I don't know what that is. My best habit. Oh, look, I'm really strict with diary.
Okay.
That probably sounds like a very boring habit, but what I find is that if my diary is really neat, and by neat I mean even though it might be full and it might be literally back to back, it means, and I check it in the morning, I check it the night before, so I know what the runway looks like for the day. It means that while I'm talking to you, while I'm talking to the next person, I don't look at my diary, I don't look at anything. I'm just totally engaged with what I'm doing. So although it's a very kind of, prosaic habit, it's a habit that sets me up to be totally present with whoever I happen to be with. And I think that allows you to, well, firstly, build capability within your organisation, but also create clarity in your mind about how to synthesise information to communicate in a way that's meaningful for your people, for your board, for external stakeholders and so forth.
Yeah.
Very boring.
I'm a list person, so I totally hear what you're talking about. So moving maybe, following on some of the more personal stuff, I'm interested in, you've been a CEO, for a while. Where do you draw inspiration and support from as a leader?
I'm an avid reader. I tend to read a lot of, believe it or not, political biographies. And the reason why I find them inspirational is because often they're dealing with politicians, prime ministers in particular, or presidents are dealing with the most wicked problems that kind of find their way through to them because nobody else has been able to solve them or has chosen not to solve them. And so I find that exercises my mind really strongly around how do you make the best decision out of a bunch of bad options, or you know, how do you navigate a really complex situation in a way that everybody wins. And so I find those tomes quite inspirational. I'm also an avid people watcher, so I like to watch people who, you know, who do interesting things, you know, in their personal life as well as in their work life. But yeah, I read a lot.
You read a lot. So can you recommend anyone? Can you recommend any particular?
Oh, I'm going to sound terribly politically biased, but I really enjoyed Obama's book.
Yes.
And I think that he certainly speaks into that space of, you know, if the problem has come to you, it's because it's really, really tricky.
I had never thought of it like that, to be honest. You know, when you said wicked problem, it's made its way through, you know, many layers that some very bright minds, you know, I like that perspective. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because even it depends on the size of the organisation, but when I was CEO of a large organisation, you know, I used to think, oh, everything's running so smoothly. I don't get any phone calls. But when I got the phone calls, they were always a really, really tricky ones because nobody else had been able to solve it, right? So they kind of make their way to the top. And I think that, you know, that gives you a perspective on making sure that you take all of the information in before you make a decision, or that you don't make assumptions when the problem reaches your desk, that you actually look at the problem from every angle before you start to make decisions.
So I'm a book lover too, so I read a book, but is there any sort of social media or any commentators or any websites or anything like that that you recommend, or is your biggest teacher political biographies?
Yeah, look, I do like to watch TED Talks, and not just about leadership. I watch TED Talks on the environment. I watch TED Talks on architecture, you know, culture. So TED I find still inspires me, even though it's a few years down the track. And I subscribe to the Harvard Business Review, so I certainly like to read cases out of Harvard Business Review. And that makes me sound terribly boring, doesn't it?
It does not make you sound boring, because there are TED Talks on 1,000 different things, I have to say.
I do listen to a huge variety of topics.
Nieves, what's the bravest or crucible moment leadership decision you've had to make?
It's been a few, some more on the straight business front, you know, major acquisitions or those sorts of things that require significant financial commitment by a company. But I have to say the most challenging was one time when I had to terminate a group of 9 employees for a breach of workplace health and safety, and it was I think, you know, the largest number of staff. Like, it was a large proportion of the staff at that particular centre. That was a pretty tough decision because, you know, even though the employees claimed it was just having fun, they were actually breaching all sorts of health and safety regulations and creating potential harm for themselves as well as vulnerable people around them. And so, you know, we had 9 employees involved in the situation, and I had to make a decision as to one or other or all, and I ended up making the decision that they all had to go. That was pretty tough because it was tough for the employees, it was tough for the people they cared for, it was tough for the community because it was a small community where it occurred. So it was quite a challenging and difficult decision, but I think the right decision. It's a case of what's the better decision in a bad situation.
Yes, Yes. Thank you for sharing that, because that's quite personal and that's a big decision. So my last question this afternoon is, what bit of advice would you give to a first-time CEO, or when Nieves was her first CEO? Did I ask that the right way?
Oh, and I was all those years ago. I did have black hair then. Look, I would say curiosity.
Okay.
And simplify things. Look for clarity. Take the complexity and simplify it. Don't dwell in the complexity. Don't make it more complex than it needs to be. I speak to new CEOs who sometimes feel overwhelmed with the governance aspects of what they need to do. And I encourage them to look at the complexity. The strongest skill a CEO has, I believe, is taking that complexity, simplifying it, and communicating it very clearly to others, and delegate. Delegate effectively. Don't dump, delegate. Give the whole
There is
task.
a distinction,
Yeah, give the whole task to the person, give them the context, help them understand why it's important that they do this particular task, and then let them do it. Get your hands, get out of there, let them do it. Just let them do it. And if they don't do it the same way you would, doesn't matter. If it's the right outcome, then great. If it's the wrong outcome, then teach.
Yes. Learning, teaching, which is what you were talking about earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I think, and to your point, if you're going to hire people cleverer than yourself, then you need to give them those opportunities, and delegating is a way to do it. And then you manage to have a work life as well, don't you? A work-life balance.
That's right.
Yeah.
Honestly, step out of the way. Let people do their thing. I once had a boss, and he described it really ineloquently. These are not my words. His description was, don't have a dog and bark yourself.
That's funny.
It's very pretty, right? It's not very pretty, but it really is about getting out of the way and letting people do their thing. And they're not going to do it exactly the same way that you would have done it. But does it matter?
No, it doesn't matter, does it? No.
Sometimes it does. If it does, then teach.
Yeah. Nieves, it's just been delightful. Soundtrack of my 19-year-old, nonetheless, in the kitchen, but he's cooking for himself, so I really appreciate your patience.
Delegation.
Delegation, exactly. So look, I've really enjoyed this. I think I have taken a couple of things away, particularly around curiosity. I think when things don't work, I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and she said, I'm going to have a very difficult conversation, but I'm going to be curious. And I thought, wow. And then you said it again, and I thought, okay, this is my lesson for the week, curiosity. So thank you. Much appreciated. Have a fabulous weekend. And thanks again for giving up some time on a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure, Liska. Have a great weekend.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, Nieves.
See ya.
Bye. Bye-bye.